Hello and welcome to the vodcast about my study table on ecology. A link to the document is below in the description. Feel free to download it. Okay, so we're just going to go through the words that you need to know and the ideas that will help you in the topic of ecology. So biotic, it means it's living, and a biotic factor is a living thing that influences the survival of another living thing. Abiotic means non-living, and an abiotic factor is something that is not living that influences the survival of another thing. The word environment means a list of all the biotic and abiotic factors, and the word ecosystem is the interaction between all of the biotic and abiotic factors. The word biome means a particular ecosystem with a dominant vegetation and a particular climate. The word species means a group of similar individuals that are reproductively isolated, which means they can only breed with themselves to produce fertile and viable offspring. A population is a group of the same species in the same place at the same time. A community is a group of different populations in the same place at the same time. And a habitat is just the place where an organism lives. And a microhabitat is a place within that place where an organism lives. Like the habitat might be a forest, and the microhabitat might be a particular log. Then we get on to things that limit the size of a population. We call these limiting factors. These are things that limit the size of the population. The limiting factors can be both biotic and abiotic. Disease is a biotic factor that can limit the size of a population. And in particular, disease tends to kill the very young and the very old and those with some sort of impaired immune system. Light intensity is something that limits the growth of plants. Plants need light to photosynthesize. And therefore, if a plant is in a place with high light intensity, it will photosynthesize more. And generally, if it's in the shade, it will photosynthesize less. Food and water are probably the most important things for any organism to live. If there is a shortage of food or water, the size of the population will be limited. The word climate refers to both the temperature and the amount of rainfall in a particular ecosystem. And then humans are the greatest threat to all living things. Almost everything that humans do limits the size of populations, from urbanization to mining to logging to deforestation to planting monocultures to pollution. Almost everything humans do limit the size of endemic populations. Then we get on to food chains and food webs. A food chain is a simple feeding relationship. For example, a producer is eaten by a herbivore, which is eaten by a carnivore, which is eaten by another carnivore, which is then eaten by an apex predator. A food web is many food chains that are interconnected, so that several organisms might have different trophic levels depending upon which food chain we're talking about. Energy flows from the producers through to the apex predators. The amount of energy that flows between each trophic level we call trophic efficiency, and on average we say that the trophic efficiency is 10%. That is to say, only 10% of the energy in one trophic level is passed on to the next trophic level. The arrow is the fundamental thing in all food chains and food webs. The arrow represents the flow of energy. It just happens to point to the eater. And as we said before, only 10% of the energy from the trophic level before is passed on to the next trophic level. Then we've got the words autotroph and heterotroph. An autotroph makes its own food, normally through photosynthesis, but some bacteria and things at the bottom of the oceans use chemosynthesis. So an autotroph is normally called a producer as well because it produces its own glucose. The word heterotroph means feeding off others. And anything that feeds off another organism is called a consumer. And we have particular consumers. We have herbivores that eat plants. We've got carnivores that eat animals. And we've got omnivores that eat both plants and animals. Then alongside every food chain and food web, we've got decomposers. Decomposers are things like fungi and bacteria. They turn organic matter into inorganic matter. And this allows for the recycling of matter because plants can take up inorganic material but not organic material. Then we get on to symbiosis. Symbiosis is defined as the close, purposeful relationship between two organisms in which at least one benefits. And there are three types of relationship in symbiosis. There is commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. Commensalism is the interaction of two organisms where one benefits but the other is unaffected. An example here are barnacles on whales. Whales are completely unaffected by the fact that a barnacle is living on it. And the barnacle, which is a filter feeder, gets taken through the water to collect its food. So the barnacle wins out and the whale gets nothing. Then we've got mutualism. Mutualism is the relationship where both benefit. And a good example of mutualism is a clownfish and a sea anemone. The sea anemone gets fertilized by the fish feces and wee, and the clownfish gets protection from the sea anemone because the sea anemone has lots of stingers that seem to sting everything else but the clownfish. And then we have parasitism. Parasitism is where a parasite feeds off a host, and normally it doesn't kill the host because if it did, it would need to find a new host. So we've got ectoparasites and endoparasites. An ectoparasite lives on the outside of an organism, like a flea or a tick on a dog, and an endoparasite lives inside the host, like a tapeworm. Then we have other types of interspecies relationships, like predator-prey, where the predator hunts and kills the prey. This is very good for the predator, but not so good for the prey. Competition is where two organisms fight for the same resource. They can be of the same species, and we call that intraspecific competition, or between two different species fighting for the same resource. Anyway, in competition, there is no winner. Both are harmed. And lastly, we've got antibiosis, where one species releases a chemical that harms or kills another organism. Like a pine tree drops a lot of sap. This particular sap is found in the pine needles, and you'll notice that nothing ever really lives underneath a pine tree because the sap releases a chemical that inhibits the growth of all weeds underneath it. Now we get on to introduced species. An introduced species is any species that's not native or endemic to a particular ecosystem but has been introduced by humans, and they are not good for the local ecosystem. The first reason why they're not good is they outcompete all native or endemic species. They are highly adaptable and they come to terms with their new environment really, really quickly and outcompete all of the native species. Introduced species normally bring with them diseases, and not only any disease, but diseases in which the endemic species has never been exposed. And because the native species has never been exposed to the disease, it has no natural immunity and ends up killing the native species. Also, introduced species tend to breed both rapidly and prolifically and take over the ecosystem. For instance, a cane toad will lay millions of eggs in one small pond, and if all of those eggs hatch, then we've got 1 million more cane toads. When an introduced species comes into a habitat, it normally wreaks havoc on that habitat. For instance, the European rabbit, when it was introduced to Australia for sport, started digging its burrows, so any of the native animals that ever walked on top of a rabbit burrow made the land cave in, and the endemic species would normally die from the experience. And then last of all, I've got here purpose. Now, why do humans introduce a species into a foreign land where they do not belong? Well, humans do it for agriculture because they want to bring their lifestyle with them from the land from which they come, and they bring with them their farming. They bring with them their pastimes like hunting. So they introduce things like foxes and rabbits and deers. They also bring over species which they find aesthetically pleasing, like cats. And cats are probably the worst introduced species of all time. Then we get on to the ecological pyramids, and there are 3 ecological pyramids: the pyramid of numbers, the pyramid of biomass, and the pyramid of energy. The pyramid of numbers just records the numbers of a species in each trophic level. The units are numbers. Pyramids of numbers can be inverted, or it can be a normal pyramid. In the normal pyramid, you might have 1 billion blades of grass eaten by 100 rabbits, eaten by 10 eagles, eaten by 1 cat. Or it can be inverted. You might have 1 large fig tree that has 10 crows living in it that is eaten by 1 cat. The term inverted means that a trophic level below is smaller than the trophic level above. Now, the pyramid of biomass can also be inverted or a normal pyramid. The definition of biomass is the dry weight of organic matter. And the units for the pyramid of biomass is the kilograms of the biomass per square meter. Just like the pyramid of numbers, you can have 1 billion blades of grass with a huge biomass, and so on up a normal pyramid. But if the producer has a rapid turnover, like the growth of phytoplankton, which can replenish over a couple of days, then you might have an inverted pyramid of biomass. And last of all, we have the pyramid of energy that cannot be inverted. This is because all energy in an ecosystem is dependent upon photosynthesis inside the producer level. And then only 10% is passed on to the herbivores, 10% is passed on to the carnivores, and 10% is passed on to the apex predators. You can never have less energy in a trophic level below the trophic level you're talking about. It just won't work because you only have a trophic efficiency of 10%. Therefore, the pyramid of energy cannot be inverted. Thank you for paying attention. I hope you've learned something. Don't forget to like and subscribe or whatever. And I'll catch you later. Bye now.